So a Hólmganga is a Viking duel. The idea is that if you're in a legal dispute and the discussion kind of gets into a deadlock, that you can then challenge your opponent to this kind of duel, and the winner of this duel will also be the one winning the legal discussion. It is kind of comparable to the Christian European idea of an ordeal by combat, trial by combat, in which it was believed that God would decide which of the two opponents would win, and that God would of course take the righteous side and would lead the righteous person to victory. But the difference is that, at least in the Viking Age, the Vikings did not believe that the gods would play any role in this kind of duel, in the Holmganga. But still, it might have been that they did, or that the people believed that they did in the past, before the Viking Age. We have a few interesting sources about that. Snorri Sturluson, the famous author, Icelandic author of the high medieval times, even states a god who is not that well known apart from that, the god Uller, which was said to be the god for duels and for this kind of legal combat. He's also associated with rings, and since we all know the motive of someone kissing the ring of someone else, and due to this accepting their power above law and legality and that kind of stuff. So this god is also associated with this, and since he is the god of duel, it is assumed that he was the one deciding which one of the two opponents would be the righteous one and the one who should win. But as I said, in the Viking Age, this god is not very prominent. I haven't heard of him before I read all of this up, so maybe you haven't either. And the idea is then that in the Viking Age, which was a little bit more secular and a little bit more focused on the worldly side of things, the idea of gods interfering with human affairs was not that prominent at all, and therefore also not in the duels. But since Snorri states that he knows that this god exists and did play a role, this was connected to some very, very old town names of Scandinavia, Norway and Sweden, which have this name of the gods, Uller, in the name of the towns. So since these towns were established during the time of the Roman Empire, it is believed that this god was way more prominent before the Viking Age, around, zero, the year of Christ being born, and until the Viking Age. So that this god then was more prominent in this time, and that therefore maybe the tradition was that this tribal combat, this Hólmganga, was more connected to gods interfering. Another hint for this is that in the sagas, although they state that the gods would not interfere, they also state that they would sacrifice bullocks as well as sacrifice to better their chances of winning this duel. So if this is not something connected to the gods, then this would not make any sense. So maybe this tradition of sacrificing bullocks before such a duel kinda is what has remained during the Viking Age out of the time before, when the idea of a duel being controlled by the gods was more prominent. But yes, such a duel, such a Hólmganga, then mostly took place when someone, challenges someone to a Hólmganga, and they would then set up the rules. There are a few historical sources, on how the rules for Hólmgangas were, but it is very different to make a clear distinction there, because they surely change, or they did change between the regions, and they surely also changed between during the centuries. So it is very hard to make some distinct set of rules for this. But we can assume that the people would sit together and kind of discuss how they would fight, with which weapons they would fight, how many shields they would have, and all of that stuff. What would be the payment if one loses, and where they would fight, of course, because Holm comes from a word for island, so a Hólmganga traditionally would be set on an island. But there is also records on people who would put rocks on the ground and would have this as a circle for fighting, or who would really make a stone circle in which they would fight. So they surely had a circle pit in which they would fight, and which would be part of the rules they would have set before fighting. And the problematic thing with such an Hólmganga is that you could challenge everybody But if and this person cannot not go to the duel. If he would not come to the duel, if he would deny the challenge, then it would have been seen as a loss. So if you would go out to your neighbor and would claim his land and would change him to a Hólmganga, and he would deny, then you would have a righteous claim for his property, for his land. And so this is the person denying such a Hólmganga was then sometimes, although there's also the problem with the different sources, but the person denying such a Hólmganga, or the person losing, or just the person not appearing to the fight, was sometimes declared a nithing or nithinggur. And this meant that they were kind of outlawed and out of society, pushed out of society. There's even a Danish text which states that if someone would lose a Hólmganga, that he would then be put by the king's guard themselves into the forest, then declared a nithing, and would vanish from the society at all. So this is quite a harsh punishment for, well, losing a duel. But there are other sources that would not go that far. There are some sources that state that you would, if you are the one challenging someone for a duel and you lose, that you would then have to pay for your life if you miss a little bit of silver or something. Also something that you would set in the rules before fighting. And of course, if the one who is challenged he loses, he would lose his land, for example, if the challenger would have claimed their land. And it caused a little bit of trouble, especially in Norway, this tradition of the Hólmganga, since, as I said, it is possible for you to just challenge everybody off their land. And since it was not possible to deny such a duel, because you had two choices if you were challenged. You could either fight and maybe lose your ground, but maybe win and get a little bit of silver maybe. And sometimes, but the other choice would be to not go to the fight and just lose all your possessions at all. So they would have to fight. And the problem that occurred due to this is that a lot of people who were kind of set out of society, a lot of berserks, for example, are stated, that they would just go to rich people and would claim their land and property, would challenge them, and would then have a kind of legal robbery going on. So this got so hardly on the nerves of the Norwegian royalty and aristocratic society that they then abolished the tradition of duel and Hólmganga in the beginning of the 11th century. It was a similar problem in Iceland, where the tradition of Hólmganga was also very prominent, but they did not have the problem with this legal robbery, but rather with all of their young heirs to their property being killed in such duels. It's kind of the same situation with what we have with the aristocratic duels in the 19th century in Europe, that there's just a whole generations of royalty, or what you would call royalty on medieval Iceland, that just has a very high chance of getting killed in such a duel. So the older generation then decides that this cannot continue, and abolished it also a few years later than Norway, I think. Maybe a few earlier, I'm not that sure, also in the beginning of the 11th century. Denmark had a nice idea on how to get away from this legal robbery and all of this killing, because in Norwegian text it states that if a royal person is challenged by anyone, everybody can challenge everyone, everything's fine. But if a normal person challenges a royal or higher person, that the normal person then would have to use a small wooden club, while the royal person could still use their swords. So you wouldn't really risk this. Maybe if you're in a very, very, very bad position, but normally you wouldn't risk this to fight with a small wooden club against a sword. So they get away with this problem of legal robbery taking place, but still they abolished it also in the middle of the 11th century. And it's often stated that the abolishment of the Hólmganga is connected to Christianity, but this doesn't really make any sense, since in the rest of Christian Europe the tradition of the ordeal by combat was still prominent for hundreds of years. The Scandinavians started the abolishment of the Hólmganga, or of this kind of juridical duel, while in the rest of Europe, in the Norman England, for example, this tradition just came up. So it would not make sense for missionaries out of these Christian countries or territories with the tradition of this ordeal by combat. They would not have any intention to cancel the Hólmganga, because this is a tradition just like from their home region, from the Christian region. Abolishing the Hólmganga is something that sets the Scandinavian Christians apart from the rest of Christian Europe. So it doesn't really have anything to do with Christianity and Christianization. It's rather just the problem with heirs being killed, land being robbed, and all of this. And it is not even that sensible. I mean, of course, it sometimes happens that you get a diplomatic deadlock and a legal dispute, but not as often as someone would misuse this concept and would just challenge someone to rob their land in a legal way. So there are a lot more problems with the Hólmganga than Christians not liking. And in fact, as I said, Christians did like this idea of a legal duel to settle the conflict. So yeah, it doesn't really have anything to do with the Christianity. And what I forgot about the Hólmganga, in the set of rules, it's also then stated what the end of the fight will be. Sometimes, especially in the beginning of the Viking Age, the loser is just killed. So there's no kneading or anything, but the loser is killed and is dead. But especially later on, they only fight until the first blood is spilled. So yeah, it is not that of a harsh thing anymore, but still a lot of people apparently died on Iceland, for example. So this is the small history of the Hólmganga, or Holmgang, or Holmgång. I'm not that firm with Swedish pronunciation, but I hope you found the information to be interesting, and I think I can now only wish you to have a great day. Goodbye.